weekend of lost opportunity, but it did have the redeeming feature of seeing George pick his way past a load of people and have a strong race.
Hi, I'm Miles, and I'm here with James to answer your questions about the United States Grand Prix. Austin kicked off this triple header, and it was intense. And I can't lie, difficult to watch at times, but still incredible to see the team push right through to the end. James, tell me, how are the team feeling ahead of the next two races?
Well, a whole range of feelings. I guess a bit battered because that was, as you say, intense. There's a load of other adjectives you could describe it with, which are somewhat less flattering. But the sort of battered feeling is starting to wane, and mostly just focused on what's coming next. As you say, it's triple header, 2 more coming down the road at us, and with lots of reason to be optimistic that we can get our redemption in those 2 Grand Prix.
What was the thinking behind not starting Lewis in the pits? Perhaps taking a new power unit or changing the setup?
The answer's not totally straightforward. We talked about it. It was, an option to do what George did, to start from the pit lane, having changed the setup on his car between qualifying and the race. We didn't actually have any reason to think there was much wrong with Lewis's setup. He had his best bodywork on. He had the grid position we had, which is further up the road than starting from the pit lane, and so why not start where you'd qualified, even if it wasn't the place you wished you'd qualified? So that was uppermost in our mind with respect to setup changes. If you do put another engine in, you go to the back of the grid because of the grid place penalty, start from the pit lane. We could have priced that in. But more significantly, you don't get to just put another engine in and not pay for it financially. If your engine breaks because it's got a problem, then the way the rules are written is that you can have another power unit at that point and it not impact your cost cap. But if you just say, I want one because I want one, that's a different matter. You have to pay for it. And that would not have been a good trade. The freshness of a new power unit would have lifted your lap times fractionally, but the cost cap hit would have not made that worth paying.
George nearly secured pole position in sprint qualifying, but we noticed a drop in performance in the following sessions. What could have caused that?
Yeah, well, that is the million-dollar question. Not only did George nearly secure the pole in that session, Lewis nearly smashed it utterly out the park. He was way ahead of any of the times until got a bit tangled up with Colapinto. In terms of why did that then not materialize in the rest of the weekend, that is the key question for us, and my guess is that we were flirting a bit too closely with the ground. These cars like running low, and you generally pick up lap time as you are able to get the car nearer to the ground, but push it too far and the car starts behaving in a fairly unpleasant fashion. If you just hit a bump wrong, it'll unseat the car, make the rear end come out on you, and just deliver a level of performance that when it's good, it's great, but if you just hit a bump at the wrong moment, a crosswind at the wrong time, then you get punished for it. And my guess is that we were just pushing our luck a little bit too much in terms of how near to the ground we got, how stiff we ran it.
It seemed like Lewis was battling with the car this weekend. Our fans want to know what happened to Lewis's suspension in the formation lap for sprint, and how do we totally fix that for quali?
Yeah, so if you'd watched it on the telly, anyone who watched it on the telly would have heard Lewis saying, I can feel a clicking as he got ready for the sprint race. And when we stripped the car after the sprint race, a race in which he struggled to get the car's handling to be sweet-natured, we found that one of the bearings that holds one of the wishbones on had started to break up. That was making it move around and giving him that clicking noise, which also was associated with a bunch of inconsistency of handling, which is the main reason why he was feeling the back end of the car. Even though it's a front end problem, it translates to the car feeling loose and unpredictable, and that had an impact on his race in the sprint race. Had we fixed it entirely by qualifying? Yes, we'd replaced that part, and that problem didn't re-emerge. So it was a pain for us to have suffered that problem. difficult for Lewis to then have the sprint race that way. But that particular thing was put to bed by quali and didn't feature thereafter.
Let's turn our focus to George, who drove an impressive race to start in the pit lane, to then cut his way through that midfield pack to challenge Perez for P6. But our fans from Instagram want to know, why did George have to start in the pit lane, and how did he recover so well?
Well, there's a bunch of rules in F1. It's a complicated business. And one of the many rules is that on Saturday night, after qualifying's over and ahead of the race the next day, at a certain point in the day, things called the covers go on. The covers are like a sort of net sock that go over the car, and it gets zipped into this sock. And at that point, it's all hands off. You're not allowed to touch it. After that, it has to stay in its little net bag for the night. All of the scrutineers, the people that check we're not doing anything untoward, they go home and get a night's sleep. And you come back the next day, and the sock comes off, and you get to work on the car a bit more before it's time to race. If you need to go into that net bag, that sock, during the night, then the price you pay for that is you have to start from the pit lane. That's because the FIA don't get to spend the night, because they want to stay in bed, don't get to spend the night watching you labour away on the car, and so they can't be sure that you didn't do a bunch of things that you shouldn't have done. And so the sort of punishment for taking it out the bag is you have to go to the very back of the race and start from the pit lane. The damage was such that we weren't going to be able to fit that in the window between quali and the next morning when the race started, without also going into the bit in between when the car's in its sleeping bag. So I've used bag, sock, sleeping bag. And so we had no choice but to work all night, mend the car, and take the cost of that, which is starting from the very, very back out of the pit lane. So that's just the consequence of having a big crash in qualifying. But on the second part of your question, what a great drive. Yes, what a great drive. Starting from the very back, George managed to get up to 6th place, overtaking one of the Red Bulls from the very back of the grid. That's not bad going. Showing good pace along the way. Not pace that would have won the race, but pace that was pretty much the same as the Piastri, Norris, Verstappen mix. So yeah, it was a weekend of lost opportunity, but we did have the redeeming feature of seeing George pick his way past a load of people and have a strong race.
James, you mentioned the pace relative to the McLarens and the Red Bulls. Would that have translated to a podium for George had he started in 6th place?
My guess is he would have finished in 6th place. That's my guess, because the pace of his car was not better than the McLarens or Verstappen. The Ferraris would have been ahead of him, and they were quicker than him. So he would have probably finished in the same place, but right up in the sort of fun at the front of the end of the race, rather than a minute or so down on the leaders by the flag.
So I imagine this version was a bit more entertaining for us then.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
Austin has always been famous for teams bringing big upgrades for the end of the season. What are your thoughts on the upgrades that we introduced to the W15? Were the problems due to little practice time, or were they more general problems?
Well, we certainly had a bumpy weekend, as we were discussing earlier, and we had our new clothes on the car, our so-called Update 19, that we were quite excited about and still are quite excited about. But we also had a whole heap of things that are not normal. You know, Lewis spun in free practice. We had George nearly lose the back end of the car as well. George crashed in qualifying. Lewis spun off in the race. And you think, whoa, is that the new clothes on the car, or is that something else that's come to get us? And we don't know for certain. All the things we measured suggested that the upgrade package was behaving as we would expect. The downforce was there. We didn't see prior to the spins anything breaking down on the flow structures under the car. So I think there's every reason to think that she's a good one, and we'll enjoy that for the remainder of the year. And that the spikiness that we saw that pitched us into the barriers on an unusual number of occasions was because we had the car too low, too stiff, and had the handling degrade unacceptably as a consequence. And with it being a sprint weekend, you get less time to dial that in than you normally would. We'll find out in the coming races, because we'll persist with the upgrade package, and if it persists in winding up in the gravel, then we'll put 2 and 2 together. But my guess is it won't. My guess is that instead of having the unpleasant weekend we just had, we'll see more of the promise that saw Lewis looking like he was going to storm to the sprint quali pole, and George being very near the front in that same session.
How does the team maintain morale and focus, especially after a challenging race like this?
It's not as hard as you might think. It burns in the moment. You know, you've got all psyched up for the weekend. You're really excited about what's going to come. All of the sessions are something to look forward to, and where you hope you'll show, you know, that the team will show its best. And when that doesn't happen, that sort of crushes you for a little while. But the type of people that like this job don't spend too long being fed up when it goes wormy, because you just focus on what's coming next. You know, we get to do something that is one of the most fun jobs you could possibly imagine, and this fun job also has the great virtue of offering you a shot at redemption every couple of weeks, and in fact, in this case, every weekend. So yeah, it knocks you back for a few hours, and then you just start to think, okay, what were the things that went wrong? We can put those right, and we can make it better for the next one. And now I'm just looking forward to Mexico, and I know that all my colleagues will be thinking just the same, looking forward to proving out whether Update 19 does have the goodness in it that we believe it does. Looking forward to seeing Lewis back on the track and raring to, you know, show the world once again what he does. And so it's not hard to stay motivated. It's a sort of environment which is self-motivating. You just pumped all the time to meet the next thing head on and enjoy what it brings to you.
Speaking of Mexico, this next coming race is in high altitude. How did the team deal with notably thinner air in terms of car setup?
You're running like Monaco level wings, but you get Monza type performance because the air is all thin, and it just means the big wings produce less force. But the car doesn't feel much different to a normal car, and the drivers will just be able to thrash it, and hopefully we'll have a good race.
Yeah, look forward to Mexico.